Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It is noon Pacific and it's a Monday, so that means it's content chat time. And today you've got double trouble in that we have Amy Higgins and Monica Norton here reprising the topic of their content marketing world conversation this year, which is all about how you can take those meh content requests and turn them into exceptional content. Amy and Monica, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us. Excited.
Yeah. I think this is a topic everyone can relate to because, of course, in a perfect world, we would have our content strategies. We'd put together our editorial calendar. Everyone would say, you're amazing. Please just go forth and execute on what you've laid out there. But of course, on planet reality, there's always somebody who comes in with this thing, this great idea they had, or this thing that you absolutely have to do because they've always been doing it. And you're not always empowered to just say no. Like, it'd be great if we could, right? But a lot of times you can't. So I think that this will be really, really great for everyone to kind of internalize, listen to, and ask you some questions too. Of course, fully anonymously. If you want to ask an anonymous question, you can even PM Alec Irvin, who is our moderator, and he can tee up an anonymous question for you. So. Because I know everybody, whenever we've done these chats on Twitter, we've gotten people like sending in the I need this to be anonymous because the person that this is about is potentially watching this. So we're totally open to that too. All right. So why don't we get started by talking through how content marketing teams typically source topic ideas and maybe some of the processes that you have had be really effective in your current and past work lives. And Monica, let's start with you.
Sure. I love this question because it always cracks me up when I hear people saying like, oh, we don't know what to publish or we've run out of topic ideas, because I've never had that problem. Maybe because I've had so many people around me always offering lots of content ideas like we were just talking about. But basically, I mean, I think for me, in my experience at Yelp and previous companies, are the best way to find topic ideas and to get those great ideas is to start with the audience, obviously, right? Like, so having a deep understanding of the audience and what they care about, their pain points, what they're interested in. Always going back to the audience is, for me, is the first stop and often the last stop in filling up your content calendar with great content.
I totally agree, because if you are building those relationships, people will tell you what they're struggling with and where they need help. And if you're doing a good job of doing actual content marketing, that's what you want to do, is be of service and help them out. So I love that. How about you, Amy? What are some of your thoughts?
Well, I'll piggyback on Monica and add in community. So a lot of times if you've built up a community, that's a perfect place to ask people. And then I go to the places that the audience is talking to the most. So our sales team, our customer service team, our customer marketing team, even our events team, and ask them. So some of my favorite questions are, why did the sale not happen? What went wrong? What are we not talking about that they need to hear more about? And then the other thing is to really look at your data. So when you look at your past content, what are some of the top performers? Why are they performing? What are people searching for? What are your competitors doing that you're not talking enough about? And really looking at all of that research, both quantitative and qualitative, to see what to do.
And I've definitely done all of those things. And then I usually just dump all that into, a spare tab on my editorial calendar. So that way I never lose all those ideas. Inevitably I have like 5 years worth of interesting ideas that we pick from and prioritize and rejigger. But those are all such great ways, I think, to really get a good idea of some of the things people are interested in. But of course, then there are all those topics that you get suggested that maybe you're like, oh no, what's going on? So as a good example, when I worked at Schwab, we had an executive who had a very specific thought about some content that they wanted, because they always did this kind of content ahead of this big conference every year. And of course, I dug into it and I looked at it, and it never performed really well. And I'm like, oh gosh, I dreaded doing it. So if you were advising me in that situation when the executive came to me, what would you do in order to, instead of just having to listen to and acquiesce to do the terrible, bad idea, what would you do to understand maybe their intent and to get at what they were trying to achieve, so that way you could maybe find a better alternative that would make everybody happy?
You go, Amy. You start.
Okay, I was like, who's going? I think a lot of it, you nailed it, Erika. It's the intent. Like, why have they always done this? What's the impetus? What started that? And then I would ask them pretty directly, have you ever looked at the metrics? Because it might be that the metrics that are on the web are low performing, but they share it and they're like, oh, look what I did. This is published live. This is amazing. And so it's more pride over actual metrics to help the company, individual versus company. I would also ask, what if we tried it a different way? What if we did some A/B testing and see if they're curious to do that? And that might be kind of something fun to do that your executive would like. Monica, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the first two parts of our transformation framework from our talk at Content Marketing World, which is getting to the origin story of why you're doing this. And it's a little trickier, Erika, like in your example, if it's something that's always been done, like that in itself is the reason, but also like, why did we start doing that? What was the original goal? Like, why did someone think that was a good idea in the first place? Like sometimes just revisiting how you got to that point can help illuminate. And then the second part of the transformation framework is the goals, right? So to Amy's point, like making sure people understand that, like, yeah, we're doing it because our audience really cares about it and is interested in this information that we're putting out on a regular basis. But if no one's actually visiting the page and you're not getting traffic or any engagement, then that actually isn't the story that the people are telling themselves about why they're doing this and the importance of it isn't true. So highlighting that in a gentle way can be good. Also, a lot of times and this is harder unless you have a direct relationship with the requester. But if you do, or if you know someone who does, like literally finding the origin story, often there's an emotional or a visceral reason that you're asked to do something. Like in a great example that Amy likes to use, and I'm sure she'll talk about this later, is like, a CEO saying, hey, I want to do a podcast. Oftentimes there's not really a business goal associated with that. It's that their CEO friend started a podcast and they're kind of jealous and they want to do one, or they've been listening to podcasts and they think they're an amazing way to communicate with your audience. And so they assume that would be true for their company and their audience. But sometimes it's not. I mean, sometimes, again, it's something kind of visceral or emotional that you kind of have to understand so that you can understand what you're dealing with when you're trying to push back and modify or change or eliminate that request.
Well, what's so interesting to me is, if you're being mindful about the way that you're planning your content and creating your content, you're going to be using an intake brief or a creative brief or whatever you want to call it in order to understand, the job that you're trying to have this piece of content actually accomplish. But so frequently, you get these one-off requests from people who have not thought about, what's the objective? What do I want a person to do after they've seen this? How does this relate to our overarching themes and content strategy? What, pieces of supporting content can we link to and from? A lot of times these ideas are just in a vacuum. And I think that's really, really tough. So when you get these ideas that are just, created in a vacuum, that they haven't gone through your process or anything, how can you take those ideas and map them back to your customer needs and workshop how you can take this idea that you can't say no to and turn it into something that will actually serve your customers' needs? And Amy, maybe you can go first.
I like how you brought up the brief. A lot of times I've had pushback from teams if our briefs are too long. And my pushback is always, if you can't answer these very simple questions, and it's usually like 5, like Erika, to your point, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Where can people link back to? What do you want to get out of it? And if teams or the requesting team comes back and can't answer those questions, then they really haven't thought it through. Then it's really just like an idea but not a fully flourished idea. So usually my next step is to set up a meeting with them and to try to understand that and use the brief as a guiding point and a guiding principle. And Monica, to your point, a lot of times you can't talk to the requester. So how do you set up like weekly office hours where they request come in just on the office hours, or a form that gets pushed back until they actually fill it out? Some use technology and time to your advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times too, you can, through those conversations and through something like working through a brief or some sort of forcing function to help clarify everyone's thinking and what they're really asking for, you can often, I find, map the idea ultimately to your journey, your content strategy. So it does take some extra work, and it's easier just to say yes or no to a request. But oftentimes through that process, you actually ultimately come to an idea that is probably something you wouldn't have come up with on your own. And it's definitely a better idea than the original kind of like half-baked suggestion that came in the first place. So often those, while it's a bit of work, those can be really rewarding exercises that ultimately generate really great content.
I think a lot of folks can really struggle, though, with how do you actually get past that initial idea and kind of get through like a brainstorming process to really then figure out, well, what can you do? Because a lot of folks haven't necessarily ever had a really good, structured, positive brainstorm. They've been in brainstormings where people immediately shoot down ideas, don't let the kind of the ideas to build upon each other. It's like, oh, we don't have the money to do that. We tried that before. Like all of those kinds of objections start being thrown out there and really inhibiting people talking and coming up with new ideas. So I'd love to hear from you guys, like how, can content marketers structure a really productive brainstorming session so that you can workshop these ideas and give them enough space for you to come up with something better?
Yeah, definitely. Brainstorms are tricky. They can be really hard. Obviously, brainstorm 101, you never say, no, that's a bad idea, but it's really hard to resist the urge to do that. I think you lean in, obviously, a few things. One is leaning into the improv technique. I'm sure we've all heard it. Yes, and, right? You always build on people's ideas. You also have to let go of your ego a little bit when you do that, I think. And remember that even if, you have completely transformed an idea from something not great to something great through your process, you have to give the original person their due credit and keep them involved and make sure that you are grateful to them, you appreciate them, and publicly thank them for the great idea. Even though, again, like it wouldn't have been what it was without your process, but nonetheless, it did spark from their involvement. And then in terms of structure, I would love to hear Amy's feedback on brainstorms just quickly. There's a few different ones I've been through that, have with various degrees of success. Things like design thinking was super popular at Zendesk, where Amy and I both worked. I've seen, some really great design thinking brainstorms and some that were not so great. So I think that kind of depends on your mileage may vary. Let's put it that way. One way I like to structure brainstorms, if you don't have the ability to bring in someone who is really good at facilitating it, at Zendesk, our creative team was excellent at design thinking brainstorming, so they would come in and do it for us. I don't have that luxury at Yelp. So I've designed them to be one way I find to kickstart ideas and to help get the creative juices flowing for people is to do a little teeny tiny bit of homework in advance, namely having people bring ideas, good examples of things in the genre that you're wanting to brainstorm around. So let's stick with podcasts as an example. If you're wanting to brainstorm on a podcast idea, have everybody come in and ask them for 2 minutes to describe their favorite podcast, or maybe like an educational podcast that they've learned something from, and talk about it and what do they like about it. And that just kind of gets people thinking, kind of almost like puts you immediately into the shoes of your audience to start thinking about what they may be interested in.
I think homework is very important, because if everybody comes to the table, why are we here? What are we talking about? What should we do? I think you can waste a lot of time, and then people can start checking their phone, checking their email, and doing a lot of other not productive things.
And some of that homework is on your side. So when you send out the invite to the brainstorming, hey guys, here's what we're working through. Erika came to the table with this idea. We want to workshop it. Here's what we need from you in order to be productive. And give them time to do it. I always, with my team, I try to make sure that we don't set up meetings with less than 24 hours notice. And something like a brainstorm, give them a good week's notice so that they can really think about it. One of my favorite brainstorming tactics I learned actually from Carla Johnson, which is throw everything out that is unachievable. So think big, think risky, think illegal. Like, how bad can we do it, and what can we do? I mean, illegal, like, let's have Taylor Swift's song come in and just go big. The other thing that I like that
Have
I
all those
learned,
crazy ideas, like start by doing all the crazy ideas that you're not going to be able to afford, you would never get approved, but to kind of get the juices going. I like that.
yeah. The other way to get the juices going, especially with a content team, which the majority of the time we're all introverts or very introverted, so it's hard to do brainstorming, especially online. One of my coworkers at Salesforce, Sophia, taught me this. Do a timed brainstorming. So set it up like a Kanban board or different slides with Post-it notes on the slides, or in person, you could do the Post-it notes on the wall, and take 2 minutes or 5 minutes to come up with all the ideas. So let's take 2 minutes. What ideas have you done in the past that you would like to try again? And everybody put it up. Don't discuss it. Move forward to the next topic. What's something that you see a competitor doing that you would like to try? Put all those up. 2 minutes. Don't do anything. Move to the next one. What's something that is going to ridiculously fail? Put all those ideas up. And none of those ideas actually make it to the final editing, but it gets the creative flow and the creative process started. And it's a lot of fun because you start seeing where things overlap, because you're just writing it down and not talking about it. And then you talk about it at the end.
I think that's a really good idea, because that way people don't feel as much pressure, because speaking up in front of a group of their peers or their managers can feel scary sometimes. So I definitely like that. It looks like we have a comment that I can share, which is from our content chat friend, Derek. And, they would do a very similar strategy too. And that aspirational stuff really can be helpful, because even if you can't do it now, maybe some of it you can do someday. And maybe some of it, you still can't do it one day, but it can be that touchstone that you can then go back to when you're having these meetings later, where you can be like, don't forget, we want to have that billboard on Times Square, or whatever that highly aspirational thing is that you'd like to do. So I love that. Thank you, Derek. Well, I know at Content Marketing World, the two of you did an entire workshop on this topic. Are there any kinds of elements from your framework that we haven't touched on yet before I dive into a couple of final questions I had for you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and we'll definitely share the link. We did an article as well on CMI that outlines the whole framework. There's two parts. There's the transformation framework, where you're kind of understanding what's going on and laying the groundwork. And then there's the how do you actually move it to a better idea. So it's very detailed. But I would say the only things we haven't touched on that I think are worth mentioning, and actually I think we're going to get to this a little bit later, but resourcing is super important. Like, that's something you have to talk about a lot. Like, you get a request for something like a Times Square billboard, but if your entire marketing budget is like $5,000 a month, that's never going to work, right? So, and then, there's the process of moving to a better idea. There's a lot of steps there as well. It's another situation where your mileage varies a little bit. There's a lot of kind of like ideas and suggestions that you may have to do them in slightly different orders and so forth, in order to, depending on, your access to the requesters and just your like ability to put together a brainstorm with all of the stakeholders, and there's all kinds of factors there. But yeah, we can definitely share the link so that people can kind of peruse that on their own time, and then take the bits and pieces that will work best for their situation and apply it to their transformation.
Perfect, because we can include that with the recap, so that way folks who want to do a deeper dive can get in there. And you brought up a really important point, which is sometimes these ideas come to the content team indirectly in second or third hand, which is, that, oh, the CEO told the CMO who told the SVP to tell you this, this idea. And so sometimes you're not even getting the core idea. Even in smaller organizations, I would sometimes have somebody come to me with the CEO said they wanted this. And, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't actually sound like what I was talking to them about the last time we met about content. So you do sometimes have to do that gut check of, is that really what the request was? Or did the person receiving the request not understand the context and make some different assumptions? Because that can happen a lot. So I think that can be the other thing that's hard, is that if you don't know all of the players very well, or if you have an organization that has, highly matrix structure, it can be hard sometimes to understand, are you getting the actual request, or are you getting a filtered version of the request that when you dig into it a little bit more, might actually be pretty aligned with what you want to do. But yeah, that is always so tough. If you don't have those direct relationships, then you can't just reach out and say, hey, hey, Jen, I got this request, and, I just want to make sure that I understood. Because you don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but you also don't want to go chasing down up the wrong path and waste a bunch of time and have that requester think you're an idiot, because that would not be.
Well, that's where, asking all of those questions in that first part, and doing things like understanding where it came from, aligning on the goals. Like, even if you can't access the original requester and it's coming to you through someone else, if you start probing with the messenger, if you will, the person who's delivering the message to you, then sometimes it can start to fall apart in a way, in a productive way, meaning they can't answer that question, or they're like, oh, well, here's literally what the words that the CEO actually used to make this request. And you're like, oh, okay, I hear that a little bit differently from the lens that you applied. So sometimes just doing that probing, even with the person who's bringing you the message, will start to kind of peel back the layers and start getting you back to that core of where this came from and what's going on, what's really going on here.
Totally.
It's often not the way it's delivered, right? Yeah. It's hard. It's tricky. It's politics. This is all like office work politics.
I don't miss any of that.
It's hard. It's hard.
That's part of my consultancy. I get less embroiled in that.
A lot of diplomacy.
A lot of times during that probing, people come to you with a type of content. Hey, we want a blog post that does X, Y, and Z. But with the probing, you can find out that, hey, a blog post isn't really going to work. Let's do a webinar instead. Or, a blog post is a great idea. And what if we add a webinar on top of it to really get to the goals of X, Y, and Z that you elaborated on during our conversation? Yeah. So a lot of my conversations with requesters are pivoting away from the content type and thinking about the content purpose.
That is such a good point. Because a lot of times our requesters think they're doing us a favor or helping out the content team by getting more specific about what they want. And they don't realize that they're not helping us, actually. They're keeping us from doing our job, which is figuring out the best type, channel, et cetera, of content in order to deliver the message to achieve the goal that they are seeking.
Yeah. A great example of that is, I need a blog post to talk about our event that's coming up.
Or, hey, can we do a LinkedIn post to get people to sign up for our webinar? Because that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Totally.
And then you start asking, like, who's going to come to the webinar? Oh, it's mostly our CEOs of companies. Well, the CEOs of the companies aren't really going to look at our LinkedIn or aren't going to read our blog.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if we ask our head of sales or our head of departments to personally invite them, then yeah, they'll probably come to the executive webinar.
Exactly.
No.
So Monica, you mentioned a really important lever that people can use when they get requests, which is around resource constraints, like understanding what your resource constraints are, how long it takes to actually produce content, etc. I personally, when I hear that people don't like to do editorial calendars because they don't want to be, beholden to doing things, or they don't want to be flexible, I always counter with, well, I love a good editorial calendar because it helps me be able to say no or not right now. Because otherwise you can end up in a situation where in a compressed amount of time, you're having these expectations to deliver way more content than is, reasonable given the number of people on your team, your budget for freelancers and contractors, et cetera. So I'd love to hear around the, Amy and Monica, your tips for, understanding how long it takes to, actually create content, and how you've been able to then elevate that information in a way that people can hear and understand that it's not necessarily that you don't want to do whatever the thing is, but that, you can't do it unless they either reprioritize your workload or give you a project budget, which almost never happens when you get some of these requests. People don't usually say, here's some money for you to do this thing.
Or even if they do, they still they expect you to give the money to a vendor, and the next day the vendor is producing content for you, which we all know is not possible, right? Everybody needs to ramp up and all of that. Yeah, I mean, this is a struggle that is ongoing. I mean, it's really difficult to understand how to resource these things, how to figure out what budget you need. And even if people are, again, offering you the budget, and trying to do things, it basically helps to get it's really important to get your boss or get the person who kind of oversees all of this on board. And I'm really fortunate that my manager, our head of marketing at Yelp, is very comfortable and very happy to come in and make difficult decisions and then push those down to other teams. Because, we are always, as a content team, asked to do way more than we have bandwidth to do. Everybody's thing is the most important thing. And so I just let my boss make that decision. So it's really important to have a conversation with your manager, keep them posted, keep them in the loop on your capacity, what you're capable of, your perspectives on what's important and what's not, where you can make trade-offs. I try to be a really good partner and my boss knows that we try to do everything we possibly can to say yes before we have to say no and make trade-offs. So yeah, I mean, I think that's really important, just to be a good partner, do everything you can. I think another thing that's really helpful lately is the more often we do a lot of SEO content at Yelp. And so the more and more Google is leaning into quality as being so important to winning with SEO. And so that enables us to push back more on all these shortcuts that people ask us to take. Do you really need to edit that twice? Do you really need a proofreader to look at this stuff? Do you have to fact check this article? Can't you just assume that the writer got it all correct? It's well, actually, we do kind of need to do those steps if we want to produce content that Google says is going to rank well. So that has helped us, maintain some of the quality standards that we would like to have as an editorial team, because we know the audience is looking for high quality content. And also, by the way, it's only going to rank if it's high quality according to Google.
And there's
my favorite, Eric, I think you and I might about to say the same thing. Can't we just use AI?
Oh, yes. No.
Well, but worse yet, if you put something out there that's wrong and AI says you're, oh, Monica wrote this and she's the head of content marketing at Yelp, so it must be right, but you made an error because you didn't fact check it, then it goes into AI, and then the AI keeps telling people that wrong thing, even after you fix it. And if in the worst case scenario, with your name attached to it still and wrong. Ooh.
So bad.
So scary.
Yeah.
I totally agree, Monica, with everything you said. I would also say start at the beginning with an SLA. So the service level agreement, really understanding and communicating with your requesters. Hey, if we do an ebook, it takes 3 months. If we do a blog, it can take a week. Most likely it takes 4 weeks. And here's why, and here are the steps. And then if they want to do the shortcuts, you look at those steps. Does the SVP of marketing need to approve this blog right before it's final? or do they need to approve just the outline and then you're good to go? Where can you make those requesters shorter and build that trust along the way? The other thing, Erica, I love a good content calendar. I also really love a good project management tool, because I don't know how many nights and weekends you guys have spent, but when something comes in and it throws off your entire schedule, and then you're in a spreadsheet trying to adjust everything, it's so much easier with a project management tool that you can just say, this needs to be adjusted, and everything comes in line. And then you can have those meetings with the team and saying, of course we can do this. This is great. And we have to move this, this, and this out. And here's our project management tool to see why. And that visualization of a Gantt chart especially really helps people understand that, yeah, we can fit something in here, but it's going to move everything else to a different timeline.
And having that kind of tool in place where you can see how long it's taken to get through all of those steps can help, you educate other people on how long stuff takes. And similarly, I really recommend people have a documented distribution process that shows from the internal and external standpoints, what do you do after you create each different kind of content? Because people just think, oh, all you do is, you publish this, we create this thing like a blog post and you push it live and that's it. But of course, we know that's not it. You have to tell, your internal teams, you have to write the newsletter blurb for it. You have to do whatever the whole process is around distribution for that piece. And of course, the bigger the piece, the more time and money you've invested in it, the bigger the distribution plan is too. So I think that's what's so nice about having those kinds of tools in place that help you keep track of it. Because I will tell you, even a lot of agencies who do this kind of work, they will, report back to the client, here's how much it ended up costing to do this thing. And inevitably, it's nowhere, it costs way more for them to have done whatever the thing was than what the agency told them it was going to cost. So they'll be, oh yeah, we can totally ghostwrite that TechCrunch byline for $1,000. Those are words that I think everyone's heard an agency person say, and it's not true. It's impossible for that to be true, because even if you have a great writer who sits down with your subject matter expert, interviews a great story out of them, it still has to go through a bunch of people who are going to make changes and have revisions and all of that. And everybody's hourly time gets factored in there. So it's just one of those things that I think it really helps for a reality check.
And content is never done in a vacuum. You might have 2 writers, an editor, and a proofreader. And a lot of times teams think that's just it for content. Well, then you have your growth or demand generation team. You have your creative team. You have your website team. You have social media team or person. You have sales calls. So it's all an integrated process. And if you switch that content calendar around, how does this impact the rest of the entire marketing team?
I mean, that brings us to, how do you say no when you have to? How do you push back on that executive request that came in when you've gone through all of this and you've determined there's just no way, we can't do it. Everything else is a bigger priority and this person's great idea is going to have to wait. Monica, what would you do?
Well, the best way is to convince them to decide that it's not a good idea. So that's what, again, like what some of this transformation framework is for asking these questions about purpose, intent, audience, all of that kind of stuff, KPIs, goals. And then, trying to lead them to either there's something else different that maybe isn't so time consuming, or that it's a good idea just not to do this at all, or this isn't the right time. And then if that fails, then the final straw can often be the resourcing question, right? Like that's when a CEO asks for a podcast and they find out how much that's going to be, like one dedicated full-time person has to move to doing that, and it's going to cost this much money to grow and promote the show and produce it. Oftentimes they think, oh, podcast, no problem. Like just go over in that conference room and record a conversation between 2 people and post it on the web and you're done. It's like, it's free. It's not free. And people don't realize like how difficult good content can be. Right. So yeah. So sometimes just making sure, if you can't convince them to do something different through asking the probing questions and just understanding what's going on, then the resourcing question or the prioritization question, again, like you can put it to them. And I know Amy did this with in the example she shared at Content Marketing World. It's like, we can do this, but here's what we can't do as a result. So you decide, and then you hope that they decide the one that you want in that case.
I also bring it back to the overall goals of the business. And is this idea helping the goal of the business, helping the goal of the team, and then give them the choice? Sure, we can do this podcast, and we have to adjust our goals. We have to adjust our timeline. We have to adjust our budget. We have to find the people. In the podcast example, what I found out, which took me quite a bit of time of research, about 6 weeks from the time the request came in, that I was doing all this research to figure out, is it actually feasible? Our top goal was to drive people to our website, to get people in the funnel and be able to track that. The podcast was on a third-party platform with a third-party agency, and there was absolutely no way to link from the podcast back to our website that we could track successfully. And so that was the ultimate decision factor that we said no. It wasn't, resourcing came into play, who's going to do it came into play, but that simple idea became very complicated when we started to look at how can we measure its success, and is what they're deeming successful different than what the goals of the business and the marketing team are.
That's a great point. That's something we didn't talk about a lot in the workshop, but debunking assumptions, like understanding the assumptions they're making. Like someone requesting a podcast might assume that was going to drive somehow a lot of traffic to their website, but that is not correct. So they're assuming that it was going to meet the goals, but then when they find out that's not actually going to happen. So yeah, like probing for, what do you think is going to happen? Like, what do you see the end result of this project being? What does wild success look like for this? And then if their vision of wild success is something that's not attainable with what they're suggesting, then that's another way to talk them out of their own idea.
Yeah,
totally. And I love this comment from Derek. And he brought up Kevin Mullet, who was always one of my favorite folks to pop in with the into content chat, always with some amazing chart or graph. People do think that things are free if somebody on the content team can do it. But that kind of thinking, it has a couple of pitfalls. The first being, of course, we marketers who get voluntold to do a bunch of free work get burnt out from doing all this content creation and doing all these random things that get thrown our way. And secondly, as Derek notes here, the amount of time, maybe we can whip up this blog post in 2 hours and everybody loves it and it speeds through everything. But again, it takes 4 times as much time to then craft that perfect email and those great social posts and figure out where you can, go ahead and place it or link back to it. Like, there's so much more that goes into getting the content in front of the right people than it even takes to create it. So social media is free, but you put your free social content up on Facebook. If you want it to reach anybody, you have to pay for that. And somebody has to create the ad for that and write the copy. So, and maybe the part of that's on us because maybe, in the past, content teams have sometimes positioned things as like, oh yeah, social is free, so we should do it. You lean in on these, to get people to try things the first time. Oh, it's free. We can do it without it costing more. But then that comes back on us in a way that I think none of us want.
100%. Yeah. I remember one time I had a request for content, and through the negotiation, I suggested something different. And then the requester was like, well, let's just do both. I was like, we don't have, to your point, we don't have time to create both, number one, and we don't have time to do all of the distribution, manage, and then you end up with this bloated content, archive that you have to deal with if you just create every single thing on it, the whim of everybody suggesting something. Yeah, no, it is free. Nothing is free. A lot of us hopefully make a decent salary, and the company has to pay for that.
Exactly.
a real cost.
Amy, did you want to add something?
Oh, I was just thinking of a conversation I had with one of my counterparts on the analytics team, and he measured the performance of a blog post based on organic traffic only. And I was like, that's a great way to measure it. But what about all the work that the growth team is doing? What about all the work the social team is doing? What about the fact that we added that blog post to an email of an event recap that we just did at this huge expo? Couldn't we track that to see which lever is making things work better or not? And he's like, oh, no, that doesn't matter. And that always astounds me, is people thinking, again, content happens in a vacuum. It doesn't. There's all these levers that you pull and you use to make something successful. And then the trick is learning which lever works best, which writer works best, which topic works best, which idea came to you from a brainstorming session that was amazing that you never thought about. You have to be able to look at that after the fact to know, oh, that was a great idea. Or we took that terrible idea and made it into a great idea.
And thank you to XYZ person who suggested the original idea.
Exactly. Couldn't have done it without you.
Couldn't have done it without them. Thank you. There's an example, I won't name names, but like a current example where there was something that's a very well-performing blog post. And even though we took it and, did our magic with it, and it wouldn't have been as successful without that, every time someone talks about it or we talk about it, I always mention the original requester and say, thank you so much to this person for this idea. And it's fine. Like, it makes people want to work with us. If they know that we're going to share the credit and share the glory and share the successes, people will want to come to us and bring us their ideas if they know that we're going to share in like making sure that we all get credit for it.
And Monica, it means people are going to want to join your team because everybody wants a manager who, values the work that everyone does and, trumpets that and gives people credit, because I think we've all been in situations where people don't give credit to the myriad people involved in these projects. And then you feel bad. Everyone feels bad if they get left out, which, kind of brings us back to Amy and what you were talking about with your person who only cared about the organic traffic. It's similar to the people who will only measure first touch and last touch. I have gotten into some very heated arguments with people about that, because I don't care at all if, about first touch or last touch. I care about the contribution a piece of content has made throughout the customer journey, because I'm B2B. I'm doing stuff that has a really long buying cycle. So first and last touch, well, it might be anecdotally interesting, but that doesn't at all give me the information I need to know what we need more of, because it might have been a blog post halfway through the journey that really solidified it for them. Or it could be a live stream conversation like this that somebody watched that made them go back and really start their consideration phase. So if you're just focusing so narrowly on the things that are easy to measure, because that's frequently why people choose something like that, it's a lot easier than trying for multi-touch, you're going to get a really skewed idea of what content is valuable. And then you're not going to actually have that full life cycle of content out there doing its job. So, whew.
Yeah,
I think
such a preach, such a trap.
Yeah. A lot of people too, just looking at that first and last touch, you forget about the engagement. Are people actually reading it? Are they actually listening to it? Are they dropping off? Early on in my career, we had this piece of gated content, an ebook, I believe, and it had amazing form fills. People would immediately fill out the form. They immediately downloaded it. However, when we looked at the time on page once they downloaded it, it was like 5 seconds, which to me was almost like a bait and switch. Like the topic was really good, but what we produced wasn't really good. So we flipped it around, took that topic, ungated it, and then saw how it performed. And then we had amazing engagement and a lot of people coming back and asking for more. And those metrics like filling out a newsletter, going to the next stage of a webinar or requesting a sales call. All of those points of interest that you can track along the way, I think are much more powerful than what piece of content did they come in or what piece of content did they leave.
100%. And especially when you're looking at what your whole calendar for the year is going to be like, if you focus too much on, one of those parts of the journey, you're going to inevitably leave out the rest. So we definitely have a little bit of time. If anybody who is listening live would like to tee up a question, you can go ahead and submit it by just commenting on the LinkedIn page, and that'll share it with us, and we'll be able to ask it and answer it here on air. And otherwise, of course, if you're watching this as the replay or over on YouTube, you can just leave your comments there, and we will get back to you in the future. But while we're waiting to see if anybody live is brave enough to raise their hand on screen, did you guys get any interesting feedback or in-person questions when you did this at Content Marketing World? Because I personally always love the kinds of questions that I get when I present there, because people give you sometimes some really interesting sticky situations that they've had to navigate that I wouldn't have even thought about, but then they kind of then I internalize them and I remember them forever. So I was wondering if you had any of those aha moments in your workshop.
Go ahead, Amy.
I was going to say two things that came to mind. One was so if you guys weren't there, the way that we did our workshop is we presented the framework, and then we presented, here's an exercise that we've already developed. Here's a problem that you have to solve. Then we talked through that. Then we did okay, now solve your own problems. And we walked around throughout the workshop, and one team, they're like, we have it nailed. We've got it. And I said, okay. So the request came in from the CEO. They're like, yeah, we figured it all out. I said, what happens if you can't talk to the CEO? And they're like, oh no, we have to start all over. So that was thinking through those questions. And then for feedback, I got a lot of feedback afterwards that the people at the tables, the majority of people didn't know each other. And the majority of people were from very different backgrounds, very different companies. And so it was really helpful to workshop that together, which if you bring it back to real life at your company, don't just do the workshop with your content marketing team. Bring someone from the PMM team, bring someone from sales, bring a tech support guy, bring other people in, because that diversity is really going to help you solve the problem.
That's so smart. That's great advice.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say. It was so inspiring to walk around and see these people who didn't know each other, who had very different kinds of business problems and backgrounds and experiences, all help each other. And you could see little light bulbs going off. Someone would make a comment, a table would be tackling one person's problem, and someone over here in a different industry would make a comment, and the original person was they would have never gotten that feedback, that idea. And even if it wasn't exactly the right thing, it sparked the next thing that was going to be the right thing. Right. So just it's a really good reminder, Amy, to make sure that you're always bringing in new perspectives. And that's probably one of the most important things that we should have mentioned in the brainstorming part too. That's also really important. Who you have at your brainstorm is way more important than the actual process or the method. You have to have a diversity of people. Invite someone not totally random, someone that you wouldn't normally involve in your brainstorm, maybe one of your top customer service reps, one of your salespeople, somebody that's not part of marketing or part of the content process, but who can bring perspective. Or if you're able, bring somebody from outside, bring somebody in that can bring a completely different perspective, or one of your customers. There's all kinds of options for broadening your perspective and getting a diversity of ideas.
I was recently doing a brainstorm that involved Pamela Muldoon and Carmen Hill. And as Pamela noted, observing Carmen and I, Carmen would always ask really good questions. And I take in lots of information, and then I will do kind of out loud brainstorming for copy creation. And I know Amy has seen me do this before too, because people be like, I'm just really stuck with this thing. And I'll sort of just riff. And it's Pamela was like, this is just so interesting because Carmen asks the right questions and then you are doing this like really rapid ideation. I'm like, I couldn't even tell you what I've said because we're doing call and response, right? Bouncing those things back and forth and having that kind of freedom and trust in place with somebody that you can just do that as a process can be so valuable. So I agree, just bring in those different people who aren't mired in your day-to-day because you never know what they're going to ask. And I have a question. I have a funny comment that I think we'll share in a minute because we can all relate to it. But then Derek had a question. He's had attended a webinar where a team said they refuse to publish content unless it hits their 3 L's, that they love what they wrote, they've learned something from it, and they have to have laughed while they were creating it. So I love that. That must be part of their content mission. So I don't know that I've heard that the 3 L's, Derek, but I love that as far as having your must-haves that things need to meet before you'll agree to publish them. I love that.
Yeah, I haven't heard that either, but that's brilliant. That's kind of content marketing in a nutshell, right? Like it's something, you learn something, you're entertained and interested. Like that's the core. I love that framing of it. That's perfect.
We've definitely had that core before. Like, did it inspire? Did it entertain? Did it cause action? Thinking through all of those emotional activities is very, very helpful.
And sometimes you just need to procrastinate positively, like Anthony Garone, who was attending this conversation today. We've all been there, Anthony, where there's been that thing that you've been working on that it should just take a little bit of time, but for whatever reason, it's not. And frequently it's because it's not hitting on those 3 L's for you. You're getting bogged down somewhere and you need to procrastinate forward. And we're happy to have been your procrastination vehicle for this afternoon. So Monica and Amy, we will be sharing the link to your slides and to your article on the CMI website. But I'd love to hear, where folks can find more from the two of you and your thinking. So Amy, I'll let you go first, and then Monica, you too. Like, where can we find you on the blog or the socials? Where are you? Where can we get more, Amy?
At home right now. With Scotch the cat, who made it an appearance. I would say definitely find me on LinkedIn. And then if you want to look at any of my travel stuff on Instagram, but most of my thoughts are on LinkedIn. I've been kind of quiet during the holidays because I've been traveling. But I'm about to ramp up a bunch of content, and my handles on all social are Amy W. Higgins.
Not Amy Wiggins, FYI.
Not Wiggins, which is very funny.
Yes, LinkedIn is also the best platform to find me. Not so much on Twitter anymore. If you do connect with me, make a note that you saw me here, because I don't connect with people that I don't have some sort of actual connection with. So just put a note that you were in content chat, and I will happily connect with you. And then, yeah, I mean, for professionally in terms of work, business.yelp.com is where the business side of my team publishes our content. We also have a lot of consumer content on Yelp. I had a team on each side, and that content is all over the place. I don't even know where to tell you. But we have, like, for example, if I could do just a 10-second plug, at the end of this month, we're going to be coming out with our annual list of the top 100 places to eat in the United States. So my team is deep in editing and working on amazing food photos for that list.
Tasty.
So that's coming in a few weeks. So look for that. You'll see it all over the place once it's live on January 23rd.
I love it. And hopefully, Amy, Monica, I'll be seeing you guys in San Diego for Content Marketing World this year. I know I'm pretty excited about it. I always loved going to Cleveland, but I went to college in San Diego, and I'm excited about some sangria and content marketing conversations. So
excellent. Yes.
And side trips to Disneyland.
Yeah. Yes.
Or the Wild Animal Park. It's so amazing.
West Coast. Very excited.
Park. So much stuff to do.
Well, thank you both for being part of the conversation today. And everybody, we'll see you in 2 weeks, because next week is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And so we are not having the chat in observance of that. So thanks again, ladies, and talk to everyone later. Bye, guys.
Bye.